Hello everyone! We continue with the fifth part of The Shepherd Wizard, this time covering chapters 41 through 60. If you have not watched the previous part, or have forgotten Turan's journey up to this point, it is better to watch it first so the developments here are easier to follow. Previously, Turan's journey out of the Enril Desert continued with the Golden Eagle bound to him by a soul bond. Now he arrives at a city called Kalamaf, a place that still appears to stand, but has already lost everyone capable of protecting it. After leaving the Enril Desert, Turan reached Kalamaf. From the outside, its walls still looked solid, but the moment the gate guard said the city no longer had even a single knight, those walls began to feel like decoration that could collapse at any time.
I am only a traveler passing through, but I will at least find out what really happened. City Hall is still functioning, right?
Inside the city, the situation was much worse. Shops were closed, some doors had been broken open, and most of the people left were children or elderly residents with empty eyes. Kalamaf was not merely quiet. It felt like an old animal that had stopped struggling and was simply waiting to die. Turan had not intended to become anyone's savior. He only wanted to confirm whether the story about another race destroying the local noble family was true. Yet to citizens who had lost everything, his willingness to merely examine the situation already sounded like hope. City Hall was still open, but its staff worked like people who had already given up. They moved documents around without energy, and when one sheet of parchment tore, the clerk merely cursed under his breath, as though nothing mattered anymore.
My name is Turan. I am a wandering noble. Who is responsible for this city now?
The moment they heard the word noble, the clerks came alive again. Some nearly cried. They still had an office, records, and rules. But without someone recognized as a descendant of the gods, every order they gave carried no more weight than a beggar's request. The man who finally came to meet Turan was Daruk, the oldest and most experienced official, now forced to serve as temporary overseer. He led Turan to the top floor and began explaining how Kalamaf had fallen this far. 3 weeks earlier, merchants found the bodies of beast hunters on the western road. Their steel weapons had been cut cleanly, so 2 knights were sent to hunt what seemed to be a predator-type magical beast. Neither returned. Then the family head's younger brother and son went out with 10 knights. They disappeared as well. The family head finally abandoned the city's defense and took nearly every fighter who remained. From that final group, only 1 knight returned, barely alive.
Before he collapsed, he managed to say only one thing: undead spirit. After that, rumors of a dark elf army spread, and everyone still capable of leaving fled.
Kalamaf had requested aid from nearby cities, including families related by blood to its former rulers. Every answer was the same. They would help later, once things were safe. In other words, no one wanted to risk even 1 night for a city that might soon be consumed by dark elves. Turan understood the problem, but he also knew he could not casually accept responsibility for thousands of lives. Becoming a city lord meant settling there and remaining ready to protect it. As he prepared to refuse, Daruk rose and threw himself to the floor.
These helpless sheep need a shepherd. I beg you, have mercy on them.
Those words stopped Turan's refusal. His mother had once used the same comparison. Nobles were shepherds, knights were herding dogs, and ordinary people were sheep. Throughout his travels, Turan had never heard anyone else say it. Daruk explained that the metaphor was common in the Gray Zone because many residents lived by raising sheep among the Rocky Mountains. For Turan, it became a new clue. His mother might have come from this region, or at least lived here long enough to learn the saying. Turan showed Daruk the portrait of Bizella, the name by which he had always known his mother. Daruk did not recognize her, but offered to distribute the image. Naturally, that search would only be possible if the city still existed.
I will not become this city's lord, but I can serve as its protector for a while, until the threat from the west is resolved or you find a suitable ruler.
In less than an hour, the officials announced that a savior had come to protect Kalamaf. They deliberately called Turan a protector rather than a lord, giving the citizens hope without falsely promising that he would remain forever. The problem was that the citizens did not immediately believe. They had already lost their former noble family and feared Turan was either a fraud or a young man who would die in the first attack. From their expressions, Turan finally understood why the heads of great houses liked to display their power so extravagantly. He lit a flame in his palm, then deliberately lowered its heat until it was almost harmless. After that, he used an enormous amount of magic power to expand it upward. The result was not an attack, but a spectacle no one could forget. In the middle of the snowstorm, the sky hundreds of meters above Kalamaf burned crimson. The fire harmed no one, but it was enough to tell the entire city that this time, someone truly powerful stood between them and the dangers outside. Once the citizens began to believe, the real problems piled onto Turan's desk. Kalamaf lacked food, firewood, proper housing, money, and workers. Turan, only 19, was no expert in government. But without his approval, no policy would be treated as legitimate.
I will handle the food problem. I will gather the animals around the mountains and drive them to the city. You will turn the rest into meals and winter provisions.
With BJ carrying him through the air and the mimic relic detecting every living creature below, Turan controlled mountain goats, rabbits, wolves, and even leopards. Before long, hundreds of animals walked toward Kalamaf's walls and stood waiting to be slaughtered. Once the citizens could finally eat, Turan opened the former ruling family's great mansion to the homeless. When officials asked where he would live, Turan simply chose a modest room in City Hall. Other nobles might have found that humiliating, but for a former shepherd used to sleeping outdoors, it was more than enough. Meat was distributed, rabbits were kept for breeding, and nearly 1,000 people received shelter. Citizens began calling Turan a shepherd who gave his own possessions to his sheep. Turan paid little attention to the praise. He only wanted the city to recover quickly so the search for his mother's trail could begin. Kalamaf's change could not be hidden. The flow of refugees stopped. Merchants began selling furs and buying food, and the name Turan of Kalamaf spread through the 7 surrounding cities. Alos, head of House Mebern and Lord of Vijin, immediately grew suspicious. Reports said Turan looked around 20 yet possessed enough magic power to fill the sky with fire. Strength like that usually belonged only to an exceptionally fortunate wanderer or a talent deliberately raised by a great house. Because the Grey Zone had once been a battlefield between Arabion and Zahar, Alos dared not guess carelessly. Calling Turan a Zahar agent could offend Arabion, and the reverse was equally dangerous. So he chose the safest position. Quietly accept Turan's presence and wait to see who truly stood behind him. Without Turan realizing it, the other lords reached the same conclusion. None were foolish enough to seize Kalamaf from a mysterious wizard who might be protected by a great house. Once the city stabilized, Turan distributed copies of his mother's portrait. Reports poured in, but most were vague memories or people hoping for a reward. Then came Egon, a former innkeeper who now lived as a vagrant. Egon did not merely claim to recognize the face. He placed the meeting 18 or 19 years earlier, when the Arabion and Zahar war had thrown the Grey Zone into chaos. The woman looked around 20, traveled alone, and was already visibly pregnant.
While eating, she stroked her stomach and said, "Baby, please do not grow up to be like your father. That is why I assumed some man had abandoned her."
Egon also remembered a large horse with golden fur. Turan had once heard that his mother arrived at Hisaril Hill was such a horse, then sold it to buy the sheep farm. The chain of details was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. The woman asked for the road west, yet recognized none of the places around Kalamaf. That meant she had come from elsewhere and stayed only one night. Turan finally had his first certainty. His mother had passed through the gray zone while pregnant with him and on the run. That night, Turan kept thinking about his mother's words regarding his father. If the man had truly been good, why had she needed to flee alone? And why ask her child not to become like him? There was still no answer. The golden eagle beside him could feel that turmoil through their soul bond. After learning that Bizella was the name of Turan's dead mother, the bird wrote something on the sand tray they used for conversation.
My name is Bizella. Turan is sad because he has no bite. So now I am Bizella.
Turan tried to object. He said the bird did not need to replace anyone and should choose its own name carefully, but the golden eagle was stubborn. As far as she was concerned, the decision had already been considered long enough.
All right. From now on, I will call you Bizella. I am glad we can keep traveling together.
Over the following weeks, Turan truly used his power as the labor of one man. He felled dozens of trees with a remotely controlled dagger, levitated the logs and shaped stone into construction blocks. While saving the city, his telekinesis and earth transformation improved as well. Refugees began returning, shops reopened, and deaths from hunger or exposure nearly stopped. Kalamaf had not fully recovered, but the city that had resembled a corpse could now stand on its own feet. That was when Turan decided to inspect the Western Road. He could not remain tied to the city merely because an enemy might return someday. If the threat remained, he needed to identify it. If it had left, he needed proof so the surrounding families would be willing to take over Kalamaf.
If I sense anything too dangerous, I will return immediately. Do not let the citizens panic while I am gone.
With Bizella, Turan swept the western region using detection magic. There were no dark elves or undead spirits. Just as he began to think the target had left, the mimic relic caught a flame of magic power far stronger than his own. That figure also noticed Turan and flew straight toward him. The wizard flew in a very familiar way, lifting her body with levitation and riding the wind. Moments later, Turan saw the thin face that was impossible to forget. The person he had taken for a threat was Meisa Arabion.
It has only been 3 or 4 months since we parted, but you have changed a great deal. Not only stronger, you are much calmer as well.
Turan had not really noticed it himself, but after carrying responsibility for dozens of people on a ship and then thousands in Kalamaf, he no longer gave the impression of a young man merely trying to look mature. Bizella, feeling ignored, hopped down into the snow and wrote a question asking who the woman was. Turan did not call her a pet. Their soul bond was far too close for such a simple word.
This is Meisa, a close friend of mine. Meisa, this is Bizella. She is my family.
Meisa explained that Arabion's army had destroyed the Dark Elves' underground kingdom. A few survivors escaped east, including an extremely powerful necromancer. The timing matched the destruction of Kalamaf's ruling family.
He most likely came here to replenish his undead spirits. Since only those who pursued him were killed, it seems he has not truly left this region.
The necromancer was believed to be hiding in a blind dwarf settlement concealed within the mountains. Arabion could not simply march a large army into the gray zone because the region remained politically sensitive to House Zahar. Their conversation was interrupted by Kadram Arabion, Meisa's uncle. He arrived with a friendly smile, but immediately pressed Turan with his magic power. When Turan answered with equal force, the suspicion on Kadram's face only deepened. Meisa ordered her uncle to leave in a tone that was almost openly rude. After Kadram departed, she apologized. Turan did not demand an explanation. He simply said that everyone had circumstances that made it impossible to keep smiling. After returning, Turan informed the officials that the western threat was likely a dark elf necromancer being hunted by Arabion. The city did not need to attack on its own, only maintain order until Arabion's forces finished the matter. In their room, BJ wrote that Meisa also matched her inside. It was the exact reason she had once given for choosing Turan as her soul bond partner.
But I already chose Turan. Meisa has no chance. Turan should be happy.
Turan laughed and stroked her head. Yet the question remained, why did Bijah's soul match his and Meisa's, but not the Varaha heir who had once tried to obtain her? Even the bird herself could not explain it. A week later, envoys from 7 cities arrived together. They were shocked that Turan received them in City Hall and offered official lodging rather than a noble mansion. When they learned Turan lived there as well, they began to believe he truly was a fallen noble with no understanding of proper dignity. Their purpose was not to remove Turan, but to bind him. Each of the 7 families offered a young woman from a knightly bloodline as his concubine. In noble society, this was called subordination marriage. The weaker side attached itself to a stronger wizard and hoped their children would strengthen the alliance. The official reasoning sounded sensible. Turan had no family, meaning no knights or descendants to help govern the city, but the timing was obvious. Once they heard the western threat would soon disappear, they wanted to plant their influence in Kalamaf before its value rose. Turan refused without anger. He had no intention of building a family here, and he had prepared something far more attractive to the 7 houses than a marriage alliance.
I appreciate your offer, but I refuse. In return, I have another proposal. The family that finds the clearest information about the woman I seek will receive the right to govern Kalamaf.
The envoys thought they had misheard. A city could support one family's luxury for centuries. Yet Turan was trading it for information about one woman who passed through 20 years earlier. They immediately suspected she had to be tied to some great secret of House Arabion. Turan then added a condition they found even stranger. The new ruler had to swear in the name of the Priya god tribe to sincerely protect the citizens. They did not have to die for the people, but they could not ignore magical beast attacks, allow villages to be consumed, or refuse patrols out of laziness.
If that duty is neglected, the right to the city ends as well, and whoever breaks it will become my enemy.
After the envoys left to report home, Turan informed Daruk and the city leaders. Their faces immediately darkened. They wanted Turan to remain, but they also knew sheep could not choose their own shepherd. For Turan, precisely because he would leave, he had to ensure the next shepherd would not let the city rot again. While waiting for the 7 families to answer, Turan often sat on the roof of City Hall and watched the citizens work. His mother had once said nobles were shepherds who raised humans only to take their meat and hides. Kiorn had taught the opposite. A good shepherd stood in front of the flock when wolves came. Turan finally understood why he could not simply abandon Kalamaf. He did not want to become its permanent ruler. But after the citizens entrusted their lives to him, he could not hand them over to someone lazy or cruel. While his thoughts were heavy, BJ suddenly noticed someone near the gate. Turan went down to look and found a familiar old face. Kjorn stood there in Arabion night attire, his body still aged, but his eyes far more alive than when they parted on Hisaril Hill.
Kjorn, I truly did not expect to meet you here. I am glad to see you healthy as well, Turan. But this time I came carrying a request from Lady Meisa. We need your help.
Kiorn explained that Arabion's forces had found the Necromancer King's hiding place. The problem was that the dark elf had taken refuge in a blind dwarf settlement hidden behind a mountain cleft. Its entrance was a narrow canyon where a large army could not maneuver freely. The first assault became a massacre. 8 nobles and nearly 200 knights died. The dwarves used ancient relic weapons that fired metal, flame, and heavy projectiles from high positions, while undead attacked from the front. Turan briefly worried that Arabion might recognize Talus, the dwarf who had once traveled with him. Turan said the risk was small. During the Old War, Zahar's group had covered their faces, and the attacking dwarves were difficult to distinguish from one another.
Lady Meisa cannot request more support from the main house without granting major political concessions. That is why she wants to borrow your strength as an outsider.
As payment, Meisa offered a sacred large-capacity pouch, a small object capable of storing an extraordinary amount of supplies. Turan was interested, but that was not his main reason. Meisa was his friend, and she had helped him several times without demanding repayment.
All right. I will help. But I need to know their full plan before entering that canyon.
At the Arabion camp, the result of the first assault was obvious. Treatment tents were full, many knights had lost limbs, and Meisa herself still carried wounds that had not fully healed. Even so, she continued leading preparations for the second attack.
Thank you for coming. I know this request is dangerous, so I will not blame you if you change your mind after hearing the plan. I came this far. At least let me hear the plan first.
The other Arabion nobles were not as welcoming as Meisa. They pressed Turan with magic, questioned his origins, and clearly considered a young man without a family name too suspicious to stand among their forces. To draw attention away from his true Zahar and Arabion blood, Turan used the Mimic Relic. He released a small amount of stored barrier master power, formed a defensive layer around his body, and allowed everyone to assume it was his bloodline. Once the apparent barrier bloodline was visible, the tension eased. They still did not fully trust him, but at least the ability did not resemble the Zahar lineage they feared most. The second plan used a smaller force rather than a larger one, but every member was stronger. 26 nobles and around 120 knights would enter quickly, destroy the weapon positions, and force the Necromancer King to fight before he could organize a massive undead army. Turan was assigned as a free-moving combatant. With the sacred relic's perception, his ranged attacks, and the barrier bloodline they believed he possessed, he could close any gap whenever the formation stalled. After the meeting, Meisa pulled him aside. She clearly knew the power Turan had shown was not an ordinary bloodline. The barrier had appeared too suddenly, and she had never seen any sign of that ability before.
I will not force you to explain your secret. But can that ability be used continuously during the battle? No, it has limits. So do not build a plan that depends entirely on me blocking every attack.
Meisa accepted the answer without asking further. Their trust had not reached the point of revealing every secret, but it was strong enough for honest warnings before entering a place that could kill them. Before departing, Turan ordered Ba to remain with Kiorn in the rear camp. The bird clearly disliked being left behind, but the narrow canyon made her flight nearly useless, and the dwarf weapons were too dangerous.
Wait here with Kiorn. I will return. This place truly is not suited for you. Turan has to come back. Do not get hurt too badly.
The elite force moved toward a mountain cleft, almost invisible from outside. Beyond the narrow stone passage, the route opened into a long canyon with high cliffs on both sides. There were no homes, no civilians, not even birdsong. Everything was too quiet. Turan expanded the sacred relic's senses and detected many lives hiding behind stone and cliff tunnels. The dwarves and dark elves already knew they were coming. The Arabian force had barely advanced when the sound of heavy metal began rolling from above. The first attack was neither arrows nor magic. From openings in the cliffs, dwarf machines blasted clouds of small metal fragments with explosive force. The pieces pierced armor, flesh, and even magical shields formed too late. In a single second, the front line fell into chaos. Then came jets of flame and large projectiles like iron stones. One struck an Arabian noble hard enough to throw his body away. Turan finally understood how the first assault had lost so many people before they could even touch the enemy. Turan used the remaining barrier master power to stop fragments on the nearest side, then blasted strong wind so smoke and flame would not blind the force. With the sacred relic, he marked the weapon crews hidden behind stone.
Right cliff, 30 paces up. There is a passage behind that wall.
Meisa and the other nobles answered immediately. Lightning, wind, stone, and light struck the points. Turan identified. The cliff shattered, machines fell, and for the first time, Arabion's force drove the dwarves out of their safe positions. Once the path opened, hundreds of undead spirits surged from the inner tunnels. Behind them stood dark elf necromancers, continuously replenishing the ranks from corpses. Turan did not waste time on ordinary undead. He hunted their controllers. Stones from his slingshot pierced one necromancer's head, then another. When dwarves approached with axes and metal weapons, Turan shifted into close combat, using speed, dagger, and wind to bring them down before Arabion's formation could be split. Amid the chaos, the Necromancer King finally appeared. His magic power far exceeded the other dark elves, and dozens of powerful undead circled him like a living wall. But Meisa gave him no time to construct a perfect defense.
You have run far enough. This time there's nowhere else to hide.
Meisa tore through the undead line with storms and artifact attacks, forcing the king into direct combat. Their battles shattered tunnel walls and shook the entire canyon. Turan held back dwarves trying to assist while Arabion's forces sealed every escape route. Not long afterward, the Necromancer King's magic collapsed. The remaining undead lost control and fell one by one, while Meisa stood over the enemy who had devastated human lands for months. The second assault ended in victory. The second assault still suffered serious losses, but far fewer than before. 2 nobles and around 30 knights died. Meisa immediately ordered the surviving dwarves captured, every machine and relic secured, and all tunnels searched for remaining enemies. Afterward, they divided absorption rights according to merit. Turan received a large share for locating weapon positions, killing several necromancers, and keeping the formation intact. Meisa even gave part of her own share to him.
Without your perception, this assault might have ended like the first. Take this share. You earned it.
Several Arabian nobles were clearly unhappy, but none dared challenge the family heir in front of everyone. Turan then absorbed 6 powerful undead spirits that had belonged to the Necromancer King. When the 6th entered, he felt something strange inside his body reach a limit and shift with a clank only he could perceive. Turan did not yet know what it meant. He only knew that the air flowing around him suddenly felt far clearer. The next morning, Turan tried to understand the new sensation. Before, he could move air through ordinary magic, but he had to construct the law of cause and effect clearly. Now he could feel direction, pressure, and turbulence as though the wind were an extra part of his own body. When he raised his hand, air currents bent without a complicated magical construction. Dust followed his finger and spun into a small ring. This was not merely technical improvement. One of his locked bloodlines had truly awakened. Turan also realized that his growth limit had changed. For a moment after absorbing the undead spirits, he felt full, as though he could accept no more power. Then the limit shifted elsewhere. It meant his body still contained several paths developing separately.
So, the one that awakened now is wind. Then, lightning is still waiting for something house.
With this new ability, many of his old techniques could change completely. Flight, accelerating projectiles, controlling fire, even helping Bag-Am move through the air. Everything suddenly held far greater possibilities. In the dwarf workshop, Arabion's forces examined the remaining machines. The prisoners said the weapons could only be activated by dwarves. Many parts were disposable or broke after a few shots, and they could not create new copies of equal quality. The Necromancer King had supplied several additional devices and helped prepare the defenses. He traded protection and undead forces for the dwarves as help hiding from Arabion. Turan cared less about who could activate the relics. He was more interested in the hissing sound, sealed chambers, and hot vapor escaping from damaged sections. From those clues, he guessed that the machines heated water, trapped the pressure, and released it to drive metal at high speed.
So, magic does not push the projectile. Magic only activates or regulates the device. Its main force comes from trapped steam.
The knowledge was simple, but important. Turan once again saw that ancient technology worked through understandable natural laws, rather than miracles without rules. Every time he understood such a law, his magical options expanded as well. With the mission complete, Turan received the promised large-capacity pouch. Meisa thanked him without a long ceremony, while Kiorn patted his shoulder as he had in the past. They did not know when they would meet again, but this farewell felt far lighter.
You saved many people today. I will remember this help, Turan. Keep walking your own path. But remember, even strong people need to return somewhere and rest.
After reuniting with BJ, Turan flew east. Along the way, he used wind to assist BJ's wing beats, and their speed immediately increased. The more he tried, the clearer it became that this was not a new technique, but something already present in his blood. That was when the pieces of his origin began fitting together. Concealment, tracking, and hunter came from House Zahar. Storm, wind, and likely lightning were traits of Arabion. If so, one parent came from Zahar and the other from Arabion, two great houses that had once slaughtered each other in war.
Mother was descended from Arabion. Then my father most likely came from Zahar.
Before returning to Kalamaf, Turan tried something he had wanted for a long time, flying with his own body. In theory, he only needed to support his weight with wind and push himself in the desired direction. In practice, it was far more humiliating. He rose too quickly, lost balance, and fell. Then he drifted sideways, struck a rock, and once spun in the air until he no longer knew up from down. A wizard's body kept him alive, but that did not mean the impacts were painless. BJ watched with a mixture of worry and irritation. When Turan finally managed to hover steadily, the bird looked gloomy instead. She thought that if Turan could fly on his own, he would no longer need her.
Do not think like that. You are not my flying tool. You are my family. I am learning this so we have more options, not so I can leave you.
After that, Turan used wind to support BJ instead. He reduced the air resistance ahead of her, strengthened the current behind her, and the bird shot forward far faster than usual. BJ immediately became cheerful again. When Turan returned with torn clothes and a body covered in bruises from flight practice, Daruk nearly fainted. Although Turan said the injuries were not from the Necromancer King, the old man still summoned a doctor and forced him to be examined from head to toe.
The Western threat is over. The Necromancer King and his forces have been destroyed. Kalamaf no longer needs to be afraid.
The news brought a modest celebration to the city. For Turan, it meant his main duty was nearly complete. While waiting for a replacement family, he spent his time studying wind and transforming his old techniques. His greatest discovery came from the slingshot. Normally, a stone lost much of its speed by striking the air. Turan tried parting the air in advance, creating a path without resistance. then firing the stone precisely through it. The result was terrifying. It made far less sound, but the speed more than doubled, and its penetration rose sharply. Even a powerful noble could die before realizing an attack had begun. Turan named the technique Silent Slingshot, but the technique was not perfect. The wind path required 1 to 5 seconds of preparation. Turan could not move much, and a moving target could ruin the trajectory. This was not a weapon for an open duel. It was an assassination technique built for ambush. 3 weeks after the Western threat was declared over, Lord Alos of Vijin arrived personally with several nobles and more than 20 knights. Vijin was the city closest to the Enril Desert, so Turan immediately suspected they might truly have found something.
I can say with certainty that I have identified who that woman was. No other ruler in this region has found information as detailed as mine.
Alos was a sharp middle-aged man skilled at reading the room. Before sharing the information, he made sure Turan would not punish House Mabarin, because Vijin had once served as a Zahar base. Turan replied that he belonged to neither Arabion nor Zahar, and would not use that past for revenge. Turan then presented the governance transfer contract. The recipient's name was still blank, but once filled and signed. Anyone who broke it would become Turan's enemy. The main condition remained the same. The new ruler had to sincerely protect the citizens.
You do not have to sacrifice your life for every problem. But if there is a magical beast attack, missing people, or a threatened village, you must send patrols and act. Ignoring it means breaking the contract.
Alos looked uncomfortable for a moment, but eventually agreed. Once all terms were settled, he stepped out and returned with a woman around 40 years old named Serena. She was the person who recognized the woman in Turan's story.
I served House Mabarin when Zahar's forces used Vijin as a base. If you are searching for a pregnant woman who escaped on a golden horse, I am certain I knew her. How did you know her?
Serena hesitated, then said her duty had been to manage ordinary women brought from Arabion territory. They were not wizard prisoners, but young women raised to become noble concubines and considered valuable spoils of war.
The woman you are looking for was one of the spoils taken by House Zahar after they raided the Arabian mainland.
Turan's face hardened so sharply that even Alos stepped back. Every noble story about honorable war collapsed at once. Behind the battles between great houses, his mother had once been treated as property to be carried away.
Continue. Tell me everything.
Serena explained that the real war had been far dirtier than the plays of poets. Zahar infiltrated, poisoned supplies, attacked scouts, and sent small groups to raid Arabian cities left undefended. From the small city of Kaimel, they abducted a girl named Bizella, daughter of an Arabian knight.
Bizella. So, that was my mother's real name.
What made Serena remember her was her personality. Other captives became submissive to survive or resisted until they were punished. Bizella wandered around asking about food, clothing, gods, and local customs, as though she were visiting a new country. Since childhood, Bizella had wanted to become a traveling merchant. She hated noble education that forced her to smile sweetly and wait to be chosen as a concubine. Even after her family died, she said at least she could now see a different world. She was strange, optimistic, and difficult to break. A young man from Zahar later visited her often. Serena no longer remembered his name or face, but Bizella said he looked stern, was actually kind, and planned to travel with her. From the way she spoke, Bizella was clearly in love. 3 or 4 months into her pregnancy, everything changed. One night, Serena caught Bizella escaping on a golden horse. The girl, who was normally cheerful now, looked empty and devastated.
I asked why she was running, if the three of them planned to travel together. She said she had been too naive. There was no true freedom. In the end, everyone was only livestock raised by shepherds, and she would not allow her child to receive the same fate.
Those were the same words Bizella had spoken when Turan's magic awakened. Serena chose to pretend she had seen nothing. Turan also concluded that his father likely provided the horse and hid her trail, because a pregnant woman could not have crossed thousands of kilometers while escaping Zahar trackers alone. He still did not know why his father had not gone with her, or what made Bizella lose faith in their future. But Turan finally knew his mother before all that exhaustion, a girl who wanted to see the world and laughed when others thought she was mad.
From this moment, Kalamaf belongs to House Zahar. Fulfill your agreement and protect this city properly. You have my word. House Zahar will protect Kalamaf according to the contract.
Officials from Vijin began taking over the administration and were stunned by the records. Kalamaf, nearly dead only months earlier, now had returning residents, supplies, construction, and trade routes. All of it had changed because of one person. Daruk returned the money earned from selling furs and stone to Turan. It amounted to hundreds of gold coins and thousands of silver. Turan wanted to leave it for the city, but Daruk said that after the transfer, it would simply become House Mebern's property. So, Turan finally stored it in the large capacity pouch. When he stepped out of City Hall, Turan found almost the entire population filling the plaza. They carried homemade flags with golden eagles, words praising Turan, and titles of savior that made him want to fly away immediately out of embarrassment. Near the gate, a white cloth was pulled away to reveal a 3-meter statue, a young Turan standing with a golden eagle beside him. Daruk then admitted that similar statues stood at all 4 city gates.
You are still struggling to survive. Why spend your effort making something like this? Sometimes there are things more important than merely surviving. For us, remembering the person who saved this city is one of them.
Turan intended to give a grand speech, but standing before his own statue, every prepared word disappeared. Turan said Turan's actions had already spoken more powerfully than any speech. In the end, Turan rose with Biche and flew away from Kalamaf, while some citizens below could no longer hold back their tears. Turan followed the old western road and turned toward the central forest region. The land that once held cities and villages was now completely dead. Human detection found no one within dozens of kilometers. Buildings had collapsed, roads were covered in grass, and death seemed settled across the region. The Dark Elves had said the invasion was retaliation, because the Necromancer King's youngest daughter and her husband were killed while traveling on the surface. They were likely the pair who had once tried to kill Ashiz. From that single event, thousands of humans and Dark Elves eventually died. Turan did not regret saving Ashiz, but he could not ignore the countless nameless graves below. He could only pray that the victims had somewhere to rest, whether the Celestial Palace truly existed or not. This journey was more relaxed. He carried dried food, cooking tools, and spices in the pouch, so nights in abandoned villages no longer meant eating bland meat. BJ still complained that his cooking was too salty, while Turan told her to stop complaining unless she wanted to cook herself. They passed the ruins of Maderi and finally reached Orem. The city that once felt like the center of the world now looked little larger than Kalamaf. Turan realized Orem had not shrunk. He had simply seen too much since first arriving here.
Rest outside the city, Bijay. I will only go in for a moment. Probably not long. As long as nothing strange happens.
Turan slipped past the guard, opened the lock using airflow and telekinesis, and entered the Sky Library. The librarian pretended not to see him until Turan tried touching the spirit, and his hand passed straight through. Only after Turan became tense did the old man laugh at having fooled him again.
How was it? Convincing enough, right? The look on your face was worth the wait.
Afterward, Turan requested another bloodline examination. As before, the librarian pushed his fingers into Turan's body and named the 3 active aspects: Tracker, Hunter, and Airbender. One more ability remained locked. Turan believed it was lightning. Turan then described the Tomb of the Gods, the Night Hunter Labyrinth, giants reshaped into monsters, and experiment records about creating gods. The librarian searched old records, his eyes spinning in an inhuman way, then produced a translucent book written in the same hand. The journal was worse than Turan expected. Its author discussed destroying dwarf civilization by changing their descendants into creatures that were strong, aggressive, constantly reproducing, but stripped of intelligence. Dwarf defenses would not attack members of their own species, allowing the altered monsters to destroy them from within. On another page, the author questioned why humans lacked creativity and whether creativity could be implanted without allowing them to escape control. The gods were not guiding other races. They treated living beings as experimental material. The final entry was far shorter. The author complained about lifespan, mentioned a job change experiment, a vessel, and a plan to transfer the body. The implication was clear. The Priya god tribe could age and die, and at least one of them had searched for a way to live through another body.
If that experiment succeeded, then a god may still be alive today. Not as an immortal deity, but as something that keeps changing vessels.
The librarian did not know who wrote the journal, but he finally understood something about his own creator. The Lamb Goddess had built the Sky Library in great haste. Perhaps she was nearing the end of her lifespan and chose to spend her remaining time preserving knowledge. They were still discussing gods surviving through vessels when the librarian asked whether Turan was connected to the faction attacking the city. Turan had no idea an attack was taking place. Every wizard house in the region had split between House Hadate and House Corel. The 2 families carried an old grudge, then clashed again over division of the eastern forest land left empty after the Dark Elves were defeated. Competition over land became open war. House Beltaz supported Hadit through marriage ties. The problem was that Hadit was losing. Corel's forces moved from one territory to another, forcing enemy houses to surrender, and Orem was likely their next target.
I do not think it is especially unusual. The family ruling the city has lasted around 400 years. Sometimes it is simply time for a change.
To a spirit who had watched the city change rulers many times, the war truly seemed ordinary. Turan decided not to stay long, then sharp pain exploded through the soul bond. Fear, confusion, and desperation. It came from Bijay.
Something happened to BJ. I have to go now.
Turan followed the scent of blood east and found a camp containing more than 100 people. The sacred relic counted 8 nobles and 35 knights. In the middle of the camp, a large woman named Maxie held Bijay in one hand. One of the bird's wings was bent at an unnatural angle. They saw the rope on Bijay's leg and realized the bird had an owner. Maxie still ordered her subordinate to burn the rope and build a cage. In her view, an animal in this remote region could not belong to a great family, so taking it would cause no trouble. Turan entered under concealment and followed the black-haired noble carrying Bijay into a tent. While the man bent an iron rod into a cage, Turan revealed himself directly behind him.
That golden eagle's my friend. Return her, and I will not hold you responsible for the wing you broke.
The noble tried pressing Turan with magic, then assumed the young man before him was weak because he did not respond. When he began to refuse, Turan vanished from his sight and decapitated him in one movement. Turan knelt beside Bijay. Through the soul bond, relief and pain mixed together. Bijay wrote that they had attacked first. Turan used the mimic relic, drew out some stored healer power, and set the wing bone back into place.
It does not hurt now. But from now on, we have to stay together. Do not go alone again. I promise. I am sorry I left you.
After comforting Bijay, Turan stepped out of the tent. His face no longer showed anger. That made him more frightening. Now he would punish everyone who had helped treat his family like stolen property. The situation reminded Turan of childhood. When village elders stole the farm left by his mother, at 12, Turan hid in bushes, threw stones from a distance, and fled before the village youths could catch him. After several days and many casualties, the village finally surrendered. His enemies were far stronger now, but the principle was the same. He had no need to give them a fair fight. Turan sent Bijay high into the sky, then approached Maxi under concealment while forming a silent slingshot path. The first stone pierced Maxi's head before she could react. Their strongest leader simply fell. The second stone struck the next strongest noble. A defensive artifact activated, but still failed to save his brain. When one noble finally shouted about concealment, Turan created a spark and fed it with wind. A firestorm erupted from the center of the camp. 8 knights and 1 noble burned before they could scream, while the others panicked and hurled magic at an empty spot.
Begone, now we attack together. Do not let anyone escape.
Turan continued sniping nobles from beyond the light, moving before they found his position. Bijay seized fleeing knights and tore them apart from the air. Once the leaders died, the remaining force lost all cohesion and ran in every direction. When the night ended, Turan counted 43 bodies. Not one escaped. He had killed before, but that many in a single night left a bitter taste. Some knights might merely have followed orders and known nothing about Bijay. Yet, Turan also knew he was not kind enough to let injustice pass merely to avoid casualties. He and Bijay absorbed the wizard's power. The mimic relic gained 6 new bloodlines, while Bijay grew much stronger. After taking 2 surviving artifacts, Turan burned the entire camp to erase the evidence.
I am strong now. Next time, they will not be able to catch me. Stay careful. There are still people stronger than us. And do not let killing become too easy.
Turan chose to head south. The north lay too close to Arabion territory. The west was blocked by the Sky Mountain Range, and remaining near Orem would invite investigation. To the south, at least there were lands he had never seen. Several days later, they found a village at the edge of the Siraf wetlands. The residents welcomed Turan warmly after seeing his travel clothes and Bijay. They explained that the land ahead was filled with marshes, narrow rivers, mud, and insects. Ordinary shoes would soon be ruined. Turan bought thin clothing, special wetland footwear, and heard stories of Slop, the central city of the region. House Levitas stood there, one of the great families famous for the healer bloodline. But recent news had made the village somber. Ishil Levitas, head of the great house, had just died. A family led by one figure for centuries was entering a succession period, and no one knew whether the South would remain peaceful. Turan had no intention of joining their politics. His goal was simple: see a new region, learn whatever proved useful, and search for materials he could develop through his magical knowledge. Slop was far larger and wealthier than the frontier cities Turan usually visited. At its center stood a memorial for Ishil Levitas. Many nobles came to pay respects, and among the family names mentioned, Turan noticed House Craft. The name reminded him of Ovil Kraf and the Pyro Executioner technique, a fire attack that had fascinated him because its explosion did not feel like ordinary burning. Turan began wondering whether certain materials could turn fire into sudden force. The clue came from hot springs to the east. Merchants there sold sharp-smelling yellow stones called sulfur. The material burned easily. Turan bought some, then added charcoal and saltpeter, which he had previously known as a preservative and food coloring material. He tested many ratios. The best result came when saltpeter dominated, around 75 parts, charcoal 15, and sulfur 10. Merely mixing them was not even enough. Turan used magic to fuse the particles until they formed a truly uniform black powder. When a spark touched the powder, the ground exploded. It was not fire gradually growing, but sudden pressure striking everything around it. BG immediately flew away while scolding Turan for giving no warning.
This is not merely fuel. Fire inside appears almost at once, and the gas pushes in every direction. If controlled properly, this power can be used without much magic.
Because the explosion felt like fire with a will of its own, Turan named it the Spirit of Fire. Now, there was only one problem. The sulfur and saltpeter he had bought were far too limited for large experiments. Turan returned to the hot spring region to locate the sulfur source. Concealment made him confident he could inspect the area without disturbing anyone. Then a magical alarm sounded and immediately revealed his position. In an open pool, there was a woman who still looked young and a giant monkey with immense magic power. The woman did not panic at the intruder. She joked about Turan arriving while people were bathing, then introduced herself as Rita Lavitus.
Relax. I have lived for more than 300 years and had 12 husbands. If merely seeing someone bathe makes you nervous, you are still very young.
The giant monkey beside her was Enril, the great Monkey King, who had been Rita's friend for a very long time. They were not linked by a soul bond. Their relationship was more like two old beings who had understood each other for ages without needing rules. When Turan explained that he was searching for sulfur, Rita led him along a stone path to an enormous yellow valley. A sharp smell filled the air, and sulfur layers emerged from the ground as far as the eye could see. There was enough for years of experiments.
I only need a small amount for research. If this place belongs to House Lavitus, I can pay. Take what you need. Sulfur is not rare to us. In return, join me in the spring and tell me about your travels.
In the spring, Turan finally asked why Rita still looked young. The answer was a combination of healer and purifier bloodlines. Her body was constantly repaired and cleansed of damage, so it barely aged. But that did not make her immortal. Rita explained that humans were composed of body and soul. Healers could repair flesh, while purifiers removed poison and subtle damage. Together they kept her body young. But her soul continued aging, and when it could no longer sustain the body, death still came. Enril was proof that a lifespan could extend far beyond humans. The great Monkey King was believed to be around 1,000 years old. That was why House Lavitus studied him, not as a prisoner, but as a friend and willing subject. BJ was afraid to approach at first. Enril simply offered fruit and sat still until the bird dared take it. Before long, BJ was perched on the giant's shoulder, as though they had known each other for years. Rita then mentioned one possibility: a white elf royal with the Soulmancer bloodline. If that power could repair the soul as a healer repaired the body, death from age might be delayed far longer. The problem was that white elves were nearly extinct and their location unknown.
If during your travels you find a white elf royal with soulmancy, bring them to me. I will pay with a sacred relic that continuously grants healing and purification to its wearer.
The relic did not grant immortality, but an ordinary human tested with it could live to 120 or 130 without the body deteriorating quickly. For a noble, the effect might be far greater.
I will not make this my main objective. But if I truly meet such a person and they are willing, I will bring word to you.
Privately, Turan considered something else. If soulmancy could truly defeat aging, Was that why the gods had destroyed the White Elves? He had no proof, but after reading the Sky Library Journal, the possibility no longer sounded absurd. With enough sulfur, Turan developed the spirit of fire further. He placed powder in containers, directed explosions to propel objects, and spread it using wind. Its potential was enormous, but every experiment stopped because saltpeter was too expensive and difficult to obtain. So he headed toward the South Sea, a region closer to salt and mineral trade. In the first port city, he bought horse mackerel for Bizella and questioned merchants. They admitted selling saltpeter, but none would reveal where it was mined. A vagrant later offered a boat to an island where saltpeter was supposedly mined. B.A. immediately wrote that the man was lying. Turan went anyway. If the man was a criminal, he might have a network familiar with secret trade around the sea.
He is lying. Are we still going? Yes. This time, I want to see where a liar takes us. Stay close to me.
The boat carried them to a village that also served as a ship camp. The sailors welcomed them too warmly, then slowly closed the exits. Turan's attention instead settled on a silver-haired man dressed like an ordinary sailor. His magic power rivaled the strongest wizards Turan had ever met. When the sailors finally announced that Turan would be sold as a slave, the silver-haired man sighed. Platinum light erupted from his body, forming whips of fire and radiance that instantly burned the criminals around him.
I was hoping you had a slightly more interesting plan, but it turns out to be another cheap kidnapping.
Solif burned nearly every sailor without distinguishing between those still fighting and those already fleeing. Turan did not care about most of the kidnappers, but when 3 men who had dropped their weapons were caught in the light, he pulled seawater over them and extinguished their bodies.
Why save them? Those men intended to sell you as well. Because I decided they do not need to die. If you still want to kill them, go through me first.
Solif smiled and attacked. Sun, bloodline, fire, and light formed long whips, while Turan used water to resist the heat and wind to break the direction of the attacks. Solif then drew a fan-shaped artifact that strengthened his waves of flame. Turan tried the slingshot, but the projectile stopped before touching Solif, as though an invisible defense worked automatically. The battle did not last long. Once Turan closed the distance and showed that he still had many ways to attack, Solif suddenly raised his hands and surrendered with a laugh.
All right. I surrender. You are far more interesting than the trash from earlier. There is no need to kill each other over 3 people neither of us knows.
Once things calmed down, Solif finally noticed BJ. He recognized the golden eagle from Komad and offered 10 times the usual price. Turan refused. BJ refused as well, and Solif looked genuinely disappointed that the bird felt their souls did not match.
I chose Turan. Does the taco bag get a say too? We had Mel, Neil, Wait, Fagin, Tour, Foot, and you do not match.
In exchange for Turan's question, Solif provided the information he needed. Saltpeter was mined on Parian Island, several days to the northeast. He knew because he had spent a year traveling among South Sea ports and islands. His journey followed the legend of a forgotten god. The god supposedly went to fight giant sea serpents, sank, and never returned. Turan immediately remembered the mimic relic found in the North Sea and the ancient mirror legend connecting the northern and southern oceans. Perhaps the relic's owner fought in the south, passed through the mirror, and died in the north. Solif was not an ordinary sailor, but the heir of House Zahar who had run away from home. For a year he had disguised himself as a commoner, tried unfamiliar food, fought magical beasts, clashed with mermaid armies, and killed hundreds of would-be pirates. He called all of it a journey to find himself.
Since childhood, I was educated until every movement was controlled. My speech, habits, abilities, everything was shaped. At first, I thought that was normal for a great family heir, but my house went further.
Turan initially thought Solif was merely tired of family rules, but the man's expression changed. He was not speaking only about strict education, but the fear that no part of his life had ever truly belonged to him.
My relationships, my challenges and achievements, even the things I love, all of it felt constructed, as if someone above was looking down and sculpting me piece by piece.
Solif's confession changed their meeting completely. Turan had first assumed he was merely a spoiled heir, tired of family rules. Instead, Solif was searching for a far more disturbing answer, whether any part of him had truly come from his own choices, and that conversation was not over yet. Thank you for following Turan's journey this far. Remember to like and subscribe so you do not miss the continuation of the story. See you in the next part.